Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. In this episode, I got to talk about something that I really enjoy, and it's actually talking about the church buildings, and everything that surrounds them. And I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you find it interesting, because for me, when I look at history, along with other things, the church is an integral part of every community. And yeah, I'm talking to a very interesting guest today, whose name I messed up. So I'll let him introduce himself, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to the David Watson podcast. How are you?
Good morning, David. I'm well and warm here in sunny Wood.
Yeah, and for people, I'll just quickly introduce you, because I asked, well, what is the correct way? And you're Andrew Ramsey, the Bishop of Ramsey. Is that correct?
No, it's.
I knew. I asked and got it wrong anyway.
There are too many R's. It's very confusing. I'm Andrew Rumsey with a R-U-M, Rumsey, Bishop of Ramsbury, and the
So,
family name comes
professional
from.
podcaster at his best.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's easy to get them mixed up. Rumsey of Ramsbury.
Rumsey of Ramsey. Now, since
Yeah.
you said that, I remembered the email getting confused in the original email that I sent, because it's just like, oh, it's Rumsey, not Ramsey. So, yeah. So you and I met when I come to listen to you talk at the Salisbury Civic Society, and we were there to listen about the work you do within the church, to do with church. Is it the actual churches themselves or all church buildings?
Yeah, so I got two roles within the Church of England. I'm a local bishop, so to speak, for this part of Wiltshire. So in what's called the Diocese of Salisbury. So the diocese is like the regional uh, division of the Church of England. And the Diocese of Salisbury has Dorset and most of Wiltshire, not all of it, but up to the M4. Roughly. And I look after the northern bit of the Diocese of Salisbury, and that's my local role. But I also have this extra role, which is I do about one day a week, roughly, which is I'm one of the two lead bishops, as it's called, for church buildings and cathedrals in England. So I've got a brief for enthusing about the place of church buildings in our culture and trying to find a viable future for them.
Because it's interesting, because it's all churches, church buildings, and cathedrals, and we have some fantastic, absolutely fantastic buildings. And as I was saying to you at the beginning, one of the things that captured my attention massively, that I think historically is important, is when I was listening to you talk, and you made the comment, and it's like tongue in cheek, about your own background, that your side of the family is all from the Church of England, and your wife's side is farming and Republicans and brewery and stuff. And I said to you as we were talking at the beginning, that for me is the beginning of every community. It's how actually those three fundamental parts of it. If you go to any village, any small town, there has always been an inn where you could stay and shelter. There's always been a farming community, and there's always been a church. And
Yeah.
they're literally the foundations of every community we have across the United Kingdom.
I think that's a fascinating observation, actually, and I'd never thought of it as in that way. But you're right, and it's actually my family. It's my mum and my dad's side. So because my wife actually was her family from Liverpool and from Ireland originally, but in my side of the family, it's my dad. My dad's side, so the Rumsey side, have been Church of England clergy going back about 200 years, so literally stretching back, but leaping at one generation. I think it goes back about 200 years, so 4 or 5 generations of parish priests, basically in smallish communities, usually rural communities, and then my mum's side were publicans and agricultural labourers in Lincolnshire, so they came together, and everybody's got that kind of mixed heritage, so to speak, in terms of their background. But I think that's fascinating around how small communities, particularly, but not only
Mm.
small and rural communities, form. You've got the land
Yeah.
and what the land produces. You've got the kind of you've got the need for community and what you might call, convivial community, which the pub represents. And then there's the sort of soul of the place, which the parish church,
Yeah.
hosts the highs and the lows, the births and the deaths and the life of the community, the story of the community is told in these places, and that's really interesting. I think I'd like to think more about that. But you're right; they all converge and form community together.
Yeah, because like I said, when you start to expand that a little bit, once you've got the basic structure of a small community, from that
Mm.
people will start to thrive. Children become part of that community. With that followed schools and education, and there's a continually, like we're saying, it starts off as a small community, which
Mm.
is some form of production for food. When you look at Republicans, they were the original hotels, the original inns for people to stay in, for travellers to pass each other. They would
Mm.
people would come in because there was a safe, dry place to stay where you could eat and have something to drink. And
Yeah.
it's a way, it's like a magnet that brings in resources. And alongside that was always the parish church. And
Mm.
those, what may have started as small communities, become expansive communities, become towns. They became cities. If I look at Salisbury, which is the one local to me, it started as Old Sarum, which then became a cathedral city, which has
Mm.
expanded well beyond anything Old Sarum ever was or was ever intended to be. And as I was saying to you, I know this lady that I know through a hydrotherapy pool that I use with a client who does medieval reenactments, and her role, her and her partner play, is that they show people how to make traditional lace, for tying things, tying clothing and stuff like that. That's what they do. There was a traditional way to do it and traditional fibres to do it in. And of course, people just wore a traditional type of overclothing that they wore pretty much all year round. But next to her is somebody that makes the little binders, metal binders and ringlets that go over them and hold them in place. And again, very similar to what we were saying about the original three, is once you pull them together, all of these other skill sets that become a necessity for a community start to form. And that's how that one little place become a town, which then become a city. And when you dial things back to their foundations, you always will come back to a
Yeah.
church, an inn, and a farmer.
Yeah.
It's almost the Holy Trinity, without no pun intended.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. No.
it is literally mind, body, and spirit.
And they require together a landscape that you can live on,
Yeah,
and that's the other kind of a landscape that you can live and work on. And this is the other big factor that all of those and the rest of the way that humans live together um, have to link to the earth beneath their feet in some way in order for life to be sustained. And that's what we're kind of rediscovering is this. It's like an ecology, really, those relationships. And it's what it is, an ecology, because it's a relationship of living things. And somehow we've got to, or we are learning again what the link is with the soil. In fact, we're learning that in the local church as well, funnily enough, because the local village churches have stayed where they are and remain for over 1,000 years, partly because they did have a very close connection with the soil and were sustained by some of the crops were given and the financial resilience of the church was supported by a kind of subsistence
yeah,
economy from the land. And so we're looking again at, because there are huge challenges facing church buildings and church communities, as there are for pubs and farmers,
yeah.
actually. In terms
It's
of
no coincidence that while we look at the news and they tell us society is collapsing, the three mainstays that have always maintained us are struggling.
yeah, I think it's really interesting how and the recovery of the link with the land actually is part of the answer for the resilience of all of them. What does it mean to be part of this place here?
Well, because when I like I said, I've obviously taken one comment you said and really sort of like allowed it to
I
flow
like it.
to flow and think about what that means, and then there's a happy coincidence of talking to somebody that does medieval reenactments, but it reminds me that just if you look at the most successful architecture and the churches across Europe and the United Kingdom, just no pun intended, monumental examples of what's
Yeah, yeah.
possible when you have great minds working with great skilled people. Right? Just what you can pull together and build. And when I look at how that fabric ties itself together, and when like I said, it's all of these things. It's all about how we look inwards as a community about what the community needs. And where, like the Bible passage, you reap what you sow. The deep meaning behind that is exactly, it's not just a karma statement. It's actually, it's like the harvest. The more you invest, the more you can receive. And when you place that into the community, the more that you can invest in your community, the more you can invest in the people around you. It's where do I find my place and how do I offer a service to my community? It's how it thrives. And like I said, the fundamentals, and I'm starting to sound like a stuck record, were agriculture, the Republicans and the Inns, and the church. And there's no escaping that. It's on every map. If you look at every map up and down the country, every map around Europe, where every town started, every village community, it had those three fundamental principles.
So that's fascinating, and hospitality is a common theme in that, isn't it? How do people live together in
Yeah,
ways that are good? And also, one of the lessons for the rural church particularly, but the parish church over the years, and I talk and write a lot about the parish system and how it kind of helped to form communities in this country particularly, and where the boundaries are of communities is a big part of that. Who's included, who's
yeah,
excluded? How do we? One of the things I say, I can't remember if I talked about it in the talk at the Salisbury Civic Society, but one of the things I often try to discuss is how can we have communities that are little without being narrow? Do you see what I mean? So that
yeah.
they create belonging without being exclusive. And that's a real challenge for us in these days when we have a growing population. Housing is expanding here in Wiltshire, as you were just saying. Salisbury's extending right up to the plain,
Yeah,
pretty much, and the garrison towns are linking up almost with
yeah,
the north of the city. Thousands of new homes as we need there to be, and the question then is, we've got houses, but how are we going to form community? What is going to be good for actually making the people live in common, not just in separate lives?
because you said something when I was listening to you talk about the church is looking at how buildings can be repurposed. What way can they now serve the community? And you touched on traditions, respecting traditions. But you said something very I found very interesting. Is you said that when you make a decision, you try and look at it generously, and it's that open-mindedness to what the church is, but how can it serve the community today? And
Yeah.
because there's some fascinating projects out there, like some people have turned communities have opened their churches up so you can sleep in them, like in an Airbnb type thing, which I think is just amazing. Because
They call it camping, church
that's it.
camping.
That's the one, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's amazing, an amazing way to allow people to experience a church. And I'm going to go off key slightly, but when I was a child, I grew up in Tidworth, and just outside Tidworth is a small chapel. It's a tiny little chapel. It's all locked up now, I think, because of vandalism, sadly. But it's right on the boundary of Tidworth, and I believe, I could be wrong, I believe it was a leper church, and it's, like I said, it's really tiny. It's got a graveyard with it, and it's right kind of just it's within the boundaries of Tidworth, but it's right on the edge of the town. So if you don't know how to find it, you'll never get there. And as a child, like all of the churches, it was open, and you could just walk through. And of course, if it was raining and you've been playing in the woods, you could just go and sit in the church until the rain passed, or you dried off enough to walk home and get wet again. But again, it's one of those where there was still a service that needed to be provided for the sick people, so they built them a church.
Yes.
And it's like, here's a place for you to go. Here's a place for you to worship. You're not isolated. You're not on your own. It's that God is always with you. You know what I mean? We will always find a shelter for you. And it's, I mean, like I said, sadly now it's all closed off, and you don't get to see just it. I loved it, but still do love it because of how basic it was. It just had a front door. You walked in, a steep roof, and in front of you was the altar, and there was some the standard like benches and pews, and it had this wonderful overgrown graveyard, which had some of the history of Tidworth, and I remember these all around the community.
What a memorable place! That's a lovely picture you painted, and I'm trying to place it because I don't think I know that chapel. I ought to.
So
I shall.
When you go,
I know the little church in Tidworth, but
So there's a couple of churches. There's quite a few churches in Tidworth. But basically, as you go past the Tidworth Oval on the right hand side, and you drive down, there's a big church just further down on the right.
There's a military chapel there. Yes,
It's actually, there's a road off that, opposite almost. It goes all the way up into the woods, and it's up there.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Great. Yeah. I drive through there nearly every day on my way to Salisbury.
Yeah, I will try and find the actual location, and I'll email it to you. And then but lots of childhood memories up there. But it is, for me, like you say, with the was it Champin? It's called.
Yeah.
And you discussed as well, like how the church is opening up their buildings so that people can use them for all sorts of festivities.
Yes, I think that's really healthy and good, and to a certain extent, it's what's always been the case. So very often the church was the only meeting place, or the only large meeting place in a community. So you'd have, if there needed to be a law court held some in the community, they might meet there, for example, or other kinds of gatherings would take place, and there was a recognition that if important things needed to take place, they would often happen in the church. It varies from place to place, and it's a case of trying to balance the founding purpose of church buildings, which is explicitly for the kind of worship and wonder of God and the glory of God, and to provide a sacred space in the middle of the community, and retaining that whilst also allowing a huge number of different things that can be recognized to be good and sacred, like as taking place. And I want that to be a really big tent.
Yeah, I like it because, like we were just discussing there, I have very fond memories of my childhood playing in a church, being in and around this church. I grew up, as I always describe myself, as a Southern Irish Catholic, and that's because I was raised as a Catholic, and my mum and everybody on my mum's side is from Southern Ireland. So, as you can imagine, that was a very strict Catholic upbringing.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
And so my faith, more than my faith is separate from what I would call the church. But I understand, or I think as I become older, I appreciate how integral they are for the foundation of any society, whatever the spiritual belief is. And one of the things I loved when I was listening to you talking about how we can make these buildings an integral, remain part of the society by being adaptive in how they're used, is when, like I say, it's different for me because I grew up in a place where you went to church and you knew your priest, you knew your bishop. So I didn't have any of this feeling of being lost. I felt that I belonged. And where we see these fragmentations today, whether it's correct or not, that's well beyond any conversation I'm probably capable of. But there is a simple solution there. Well, let's repurpose some of these buildings, bring people back in under the kind of the I don't know, stewardship of the local priest or bishop, whatever, and just reintroduce people to, like, well, when it's not being used for the local band, when it's not being used for the local meeting, we have services on Sunday. You may want to come along and listen. You may find something that resonates with you. Or if you're having a trouble in your life, you now know me. My door is open to you. Do you know what I mean? We don't exclude people. We include. And I just, like I said, when I look at these buildings, that's what they mean to me. And that's what I see them as.
I'm really interested to hear that. I agree with you, and churches are doing that up and down the country in different ways. And I guess I'm very conscious that in a more secular society, many people won't understand what the churches were for or are for now, and could often feel that this is no place for me because I'm not religious. I'm not sure what I believe, or I believe something else, or I don't. Many people for very good reasons have got difficulties with the church. Often it's the church's fault, and that means that often people will see these familiar kind of iconic buildings in the landscape, but actually feel I couldn't cross the threshold and go in there because I'd either be being a hypocrite, or it's not for me, or I'd feel uneasy. And so a lot of my work and a lot of the work of my colleagues is trying to put people at their ease about these places, which can provoke all kinds of feelings, both the homely ones that you describe and some fearful ones too. But actually say these are extraordinary. They tell the story of this community. And they also tell the story of the kind of rooting of Christian faith in the land, and they're rather like a work of art in the art gallery. They're kind of very hospitable because they do kind of speak about what they're for, and there's all of the imagery and the stained glasses and and all of the building itself would tell you what it's for, but it doesn't. It kind of doesn't. The buildings don't preach at you in a way that you have to, you have to submit to. Do you know what I mean? You can be a building and you can make of it what you can and what you want to, and that I think they're very inclusive actually. Once you cross the threshold.
Well, a good example is I met you because you came to do a talk at the AGM for Salisbury Civic Society. We weren't discussing God. We weren't discussing religion. You weren't talking. You were talking about the importance and preservation of buildings, and everybody at that AGM has a passion for the importance and preservation of buildings. So it's including people. And one of the things I hope that people understand from our conversation and the message that I'm trying to push out there is, like you touched on, it's like you can accuse every church, every secular whatever, of great crimes. You can, and you can go to people that have never believed in any deity and accuse them of great crimes. It's not exclusive to the deity that you sit under, but it's putting aside where the faith is. These were always roofs that people could sit under as a community, and whether you visit on a Sunday, whether you sit for a sermon, there are people who go to a church, your local parish church, because they're interested in their community, and it's always a crossroads where people can join each other. If that's your choice, if you want to invest in your community, it's a great place to start. by getting involved in the traditional buildings, understanding the traditional landscapes, understanding the faith, just all of it, and how it expanded. Going back to what you and I were saying before, the agriculture, the publicans, and the church. If you look inwards towards where your community gathers, there's always a church. And if people start, you don't have to go in there and start doing the sign of the cross and praying to Jesus. No, nobody's asking you to do that. We're just saying, if you take an interest in these old buildings and what's going on in them and the people who are part of that community, if you don't feel you belong somewhere, there's actually a community that says, hey, come on in, you're welcome.
Yeah, and I think music's got a good way of doing that.
Yeah.
I find again and again, and I often find, so in Wiltshire, for example, lots of churches have ancient bells. This was in mind because I did a service about 10 days ago for the blessing of some bells that have been reconditioned, and this was in a village called Collingbourne, Deuces, which is not that
just outside of Tidworth, yeah.
yeah, and one of their bells was cast in 1490, something like that, and bell ringers often don't stay for services, but they ring for services, and they're like an alternative congregation, and they come and they get the role of the church in the community, and musically they find a way of belonging there. And I'm involved in contemporary music, popular music, and I often found that putting on gigs and concerts in church buildings when I was a parish priest was another really, really positive way of using what's an extraordinary, and most of them are pretty beautiful. I mean, not all of them are beautiful, but actually all of them are designed kind of with a for the architecture to provoke wonder and awe and mystery. So even if it's a very simple building, there's a sense of presence in there, which is needs to be experienced, and so they make perfect venues. They're lovely sound wise because they were built, most of them, before electronic amplification, so they had to be. People have to be heard in them, and so they've got this amazing resonance and echo. So I'm just about to be recording an album in a church. I did this a couple of years ago of folk songs, and I've begun to record in church buildings because they sound great, and they also, as a way of kind of showcasing and modeling what you can, how these buildings can be used. And folk musicians love playing in churches, and more churches are used for concerts in that way. Because I
was just gonna say that's again, because if you go and see a band at your local church when you're young, the memories that'll invoke as you get older, where the church will become so precious to you know what I mean, like how you grew, how you evolved, all of those amazing memories. It's the sort of thing where you could imagine teenagers going along, having a great night, getting into trouble, and talking to their mates 20 years, 30 years later. Do you remember that time we went to the band and saw the church, and at the church, and we did this and we did this, and we, and it just invokes so many memories. Because when people talk about growing up, they often talk about the music festival they went to, the first band they ever saw, and all of these things that were so important to them.
No, that's right. I think they are memorable, and it just, people can get used to being at home in them.
Yeah, can I just touch quickly, because I'm conscious of time as well? The blessing of the bell from 1490, you said?
Yeah.
Because that's, I didn't even know. I mean, again, talking about Collingbourne Juices, I knew where it was because I used to live in Tidworth, and I had friends that lived there. But that's nearly 500 years.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? They're not all that old, and that's a particularly old one, and some of them were cast in the last century, and back over the centuries. But they too, if you think of that particular bell, ringing for 500
Yeah.
years in the same landscape. That note, that tone,
But that's
literally.
it, because that was before
Wow.
we discovered the Americas.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. So that would have been, that would have rung
Yeah.
to declare things like, the retreat of the Spanish Armada,
Yeah.
or victory over Napoleon, or the end of the Second World War, or whatever it might be, along with, countless hundreds of lives. There would be a slow tolling bell to announce to those in the fields that somebody had died, what they call the passing
The
bell,
bell tolls. Yeah.
for whom the bell tolls, all of that. So not only the individual lives in the community, but the great events of the nation,
And
right up to the Colin Bonducis bells rang a few weeks ago for the 80th anniversary of D-Day landings.
yeah,
So,
what I mean.
but it was the same
Bell.
bell
Yeah, the
as
same.
ringing
This is what I
from
mean.
1490.
Because this is that thing about going back. Somebody made the bell. Somebody made the rope. The spindle that the bell will pivot on. It was made. Somebody built the church, and we're talking 500 years nearly.
Yeah.
And it's served its community throughout. Something as simple as a bell, but the craftsmanship behind it, the construction behind it, the meaning and the purpose it is served. I mean, in that nearly 500 years, how many generations of bell ringers have there been?
I
All
know.
turning up for their community.
I know. It's wonderful when you think about it.
Boggles
And
the mind.
I have this kind of thought sometimes. I was reflecting on this recently. It was when I was recording in the church, where if you have, the more sensitive and the specialized your microphone is, the more you pick up, and the more attuned it is, if you like, to the atmosphere of the place. And when you're recording on a computer, that you have the dying signal on the screen of the sound of the note as it fades away. You get this little sort of line graphing down until the note disappears. And the more sensitive it is, the longer that picks up. And when you're recording a song, when you're recording a song, you don't press stop as soon as you've stopped singing, obviously, because you've got this lovely long tail of the sound fading out. And I had this kind of fanciful thought that if you had microphones sensitive enough, you could hear. You could still pick up the fading signal of all the people who'd sung.
No, I like that, because that's where my mind is
going. Over the years.
There's a soundtrack across the countryside.
There it is. It's almost as if, and when you sing in a service, when you sing ancient hymns, because some of the hymns have also been sung for several hundred years in the same place, it's almost like the walls know the words,
Yeah, definitely.
And it's like the whole place is singing along, and there's this, again, it's fanciful, but it's true to a degree, that there's the walls have kind of soaked up the notes and the music of that community over the years. And when we join in that Sunday by Sunday, or whenever, you're actually just joining in to something that's still ringing from those who've sung in it, played in it for centuries.
We know that brickwork and stuff can absorb sound, so that's been absorbing bells, hymns, songs, the sound of footsteps for literally, in this case, centuries. Absolute centuries. All these, and it's alive. It's still alive. Yeah. So every time you, like the rings on a tree, the older it becomes. Every time you turn up, and every time you join in, every time you sing a song, you're adding to the density of each ring for each year, for each century.
Exactly right. That's the fabulous thing about it. St. Peter calls the church in the Bible. He calls the church. He says, "You're like lively stones, living stones." And in the old translation, King James Bible, he says, "Ye are lively stones."
Yeah.
And I often think about that. It's like, because the Bible says the church is people. It's not a building, but it's also it's a people who are like a building.
Yes.
living stones, but it's also, I reckon, it's buildings that are like people because they've sucked up the life of the people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, because like I say, that the excitement from a bell from 1490, and I'm thinking, I don't know if we have any trees locally that would be older than that bell. So when you think of things like the mighty oak and stuff, which generally about 350 years before, before they.
The Big Belly Oak in the Savernake Forest is nearly 1,000 years old.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and that's it, and
Yeah.
they're very few and far between. So that bell would have been heard by a sapling oak that lived its entire magnificent life, and one day heard that bell for its last time.
Yeah. It is. I can. This is the sort of thing I can think about for hours.
Yeah, so it's a good job I have. It's good that I have a job. Otherwise, I would spend too much time thinking about these things. But as we're talking about time, I will wrap up because I know time is precious. I have this question that I always ask at the end of every podcast, and it's very random, but I'm going to change it slightly. So normally I say, if you could go anywhere in time, where would you go? Why? What car would you drive, and what music would you be listening to? So you can answer that if you want, but my question would be to you, if you could go to any period in time, anywhere in history, what church would you see being built and why?
Oh, that's great. I can give you the answer in the first to the first question as well, because I love old cars, and I love
That's why I asked the question. I love cars.
I'd like to be visiting. This is before the church bit, because I want to do the other
Yeah, of
bit
course,
too.
yeah.
I'd want to get to the Cavern in Liverpool, where my mother-in-law was a member of the Cavern Club.
Oh, wow.
In the late 50s, early 60s, and I would love to see one of the early performances of the Beatles, which I'm a huge Fabs fan. So, and I would be driving there in. Actually, then my favourite cars are from the mid 60s, so I love Rovers and Triumphs.
Oh, nice.
But they wouldn't have been quite built for them. So
it's a magical world, so you can choose whatever you want.
I go there I'll go there in a Rover P5, which is
Coupe?
in a coupe. Yeah.
Now I know the car you're on about.
You do. I'm impressed. Yeah. The coupe
3.5 litre V8 automatic.
Just so.
Leather. Yeah, I know exactly that car. It was one of my favourite growing up. So.
Yeah. But churches, were you asking which church would I go to seeing built?
Yeah, so if you could go back historically, which church would you see built and why?
I think it's an obvious choice, but I would really love to see Salisbury Cathedral taking shape, partly because, as you may know, it was built barely without foundations, built on a riverbed.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. It's got to look like a sort of 3-foot foundation or something. It's gravel and rock and riverbed underneath it, literally. And it sits, and the roof of Salisbury Cathedral isn't attached to the building. It sits on it because it's so heavy. All of that lead and timber just rests, and then the building rests on the riverbed. And how, for 900 years, whatever, it stayed there is extraordinary. It's miraculous almost.
I can say to somebody, if you've never done the tour of the cathedral, the spire tour into the roof, you must. It's fantastic. It's absolutely amazing. It's
as good as seeing the lower part, isn't it?
I think it's better, because I think you get a much greater understanding of what they achieved. Don't get me wrong. You can go and see the world's oldest working clock. That's a fantastic thing to see. You can see one of the 4 original Magna Cartas. I do like Salisbury Cathedral, but I remember as many times as I visited Salisbury Cathedral and been blown away when I did the spire tour and walked across the roof. And you see all of their history and everything. I was just like, okay, I wasn't ready for this.
I know. I actually love it more. And in amongst those beams, did you hear that one of the beams was the mast of a Tudor galleon?
That's the one that always fascinates me, because it was the longest piece of straight wood you could get. So they
Yeah.
had to use it for that purpose, for straight lines. But once they built the roof, there was no way to remove it. So they just left it up there. And you're just like,
But that had already travelled the known world and the seven seas.
yeah. So it's probably like closer to 1,000 years old on a 900-year-old church. It
It's just amazing.
and
Yeah.
and how old was the tree that it come from that it was that tall? It's
Yeah.
that, we were talking about living stones. It's
Yeah.
right there in the history of Salisbury Cathedral roof that the tree would have probably been 200-300 years old, was probably cut down and used 100, over 100. So it's potentially 1,200 years old because of, how old was it before it was cut down? How old was it before it became a mast? How old was it a mast long? Was it a mast fall before it ended up with the church? And you could be looking at 12 to 1,500 years of living history.
An extraordinary thing.
How many hands have laid on that? How many sails were hoisted? How many? Oh, and now we're going to repurpose it.
Yeah.
Just
Beautiful.
Anyway, we're going to end up on another conversation, so let's stop there. And genuinely can't thank you enough. I've really appreciated your time. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I've loved it.
And there you have it, another episode of the David Watson podcast. And I hope when you heard that and you listened to Andrew and the challenges that face some of our history and the buildings that surround them, that there's a lot of positives to be taken and a lot of steps we can do to move forward. And I, for one, cherish all of our heritage and all of our old buildings. They are a fantastic example, for me at least, of how communities can thrive together. And as always, I'll finish with my normal closing statement. Wherever you are from, whatever you believe, thank you very much for listening. Please take care and be blessed.